Und as more people drop in, I would say let's kick it off, if okay for you guys. So welcome everybody. Welcome Thomas, Sebastian, Lucia, Katrin, Tobias, and maybe some more who will join in a couple of seconds. My name is Bernd Zimmermann, and I'm happy to welcome you all and Till Kellerhoff to this talk, presented by Developing Awesome Organizations and sponsored by Chain Pioneer Sustainability Talks. The limit to growth is a study, and I will introduce Tim more in a second. The limit of growth is or was a study on the future of the world economic, published in 1973, and it was produced at the MIT and financed, by the way, by Volkswagen, and it was commissioned by the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome, and I just looked that up. I sound probably so smart now, but I had to look it up, was founded in April 1968 by an Italian industrial person and Director General for Scientific Affairs of the OECD. So it was always, and I think it still is, and probably Till, you can tell us later a little bit more also there. The idea to be a non-profit informal organization of, let's say, intellectual, scientific, but also business leaders, whose goal is to discuss major global pressing issues, so to speak. And the starting point of the study, The Limits to Growth, was to show that the current individual local actions of us all, or of the ones 1972, have global effects, which, however, do not correspond to the time horizon and the scope of action of the individual. So the individual is not so much aware of it. And I was instantly reminded on the story which I often talk to or tell in change management, of this frog who sits in a glass of water, and when you start to boil the water, the frog doesn't get these slight increases of the heat, and then burns at the end of the day. And so I think that is the problem in change management with all these, why do you need this sense of urgency, but how do you create this sense of urgency? And here I think it was an initial similar starting point. But again, Till, please correct me later. And then 1993, there was a revision of or it was called the New Limits to Growth. And 2004, we had the 30-year update of the Limits to Growth, and this is the picture you see here on the screen. So very interesting, and Till will tell us today about then the latest revision and what are the recommendations of the Club of Rome, and then later we can talk about how we bring it into action, maybe for organizational development, or for organizations and people or practitioners of organizational development. And what I found interesting, and that's why we asked Till to give this little keynote here, this little presentation, is because as Developing Awesome Organizations, we already have in our mission statement as a nonprofit association for OD practitioners, we think, or we want to create, or that OD creates an impact not only on profit, but also on people in terms of health and personal growth, but also on planet. And similar, we see already, for example, with change pioneers who are organized like an ecosystem or in an ecosystem way, that they integrate the consumers, the customers, so to speak, already on an eye level. So they talk about peer. So the consumer or the customer is already more integrated into this ecosystem, is not another system, so to speak. And even external stakeholders, even down to society and or environment, are integrated in, for example, org design ideas like we see here on this ecosystem slide. And I think the limits to growth, or following the tradition of criticizing unextended growth, especially growth in a business context, or the Club of Rome presenting then the limit of growth, had probably the same problems or topics, and Till happy to discuss this later, which you need to tackle when you work in organizational development. So we all probably know from change management or any strategic initiative we want to drive, or even setting up a new business, it is hard to find people in organizations who are not just only linear or non-complex thinking, but, for example, who can think systemic, who can think complex, or even beyond complexity. how to create a sense of urgency. I already said this problem. The limit of growth was published, and well, we know still in what world we live today. And Till will also tell us more about the latest scientific research there. How do you cope with the VUCA world, and looking at this huge topic of climate? This, I think, this is purely VUCA, but you have to deal with it somehow. In organizations, we see cultural and systemic forces, like Till just in the pre-talk said. There were also groups of resistance who don't believe in that humans are somehow responsible for climate change, and so they kind of develop some forces and develop some actions. So how do you cope with that? How do you cope with the resistance? And how do we all cope with the maybe unreflected adoption of system beliefs and values? So maybe also our beliefs about work and growth and business and society or organizational development is maybe a little bit unreflected. And I think today we have the chance, after the most likely very great keynote by Till, to maybe reflect on these questions together and find maybe solutions or first ideas, first ways out. And I put two questions on the right-hand side. So, is or can OD contribute maybe more or even at all to save this planet? So how much is our often internal organizational development work contributing maybe to society and planet, or is it just contributing to the business success, to the efficiency and effectiveness, and maybe a little bit people health of the organization? And if it can contribute, how can it contribute? So how are maybe already here good practice in the room? What are companies doing? What are OD professionals doing, and so on? So with this little introduction, please, welcome again with me, Till Kellerhoff, and you see his impressive vita here. And Till and I met together with Tobias in Zurich on a conference from the Zurich environmental association, the ÖBU, and he gave. It was really fascinating with his wit and his intellect. I think it's just 20-minute speech in a room of 300, 400 people. And at least I was blown away, and I think Tobias also. And so afterwards, we approached Till with a beer in the hand and asked him whether he could give us here this little talk. And so, Till, it's really my pleasure to have you here, and I just hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. Unfortunately, we don't have the chance to get a beer this time afterwards, but yeah, maybe individual ones. So let me just share my screen, and I hope you are able to see that in a second.
Works.
You are. Very good. So yeah, great to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I will start with some brief words about Club of Rome. Tobias and Bernd, you might know that, and then moving to the limits to growth and the implications of this study for our world today, and then also discussing a little bit the practical implications of that on a political level today. And then very much looking forward to the discussion. And please feel free to interrupt as well. And if you feel like you would like to dive deeper into a specific aspect I mentioned, I'm very happy to make this more interactive. The Club of Rome, you mentioned that, was founded in 68 by an industrialist, Aurelio Pache, and Alexander King from the OECD, to look at the kind of future predicament at mankind. They were concerned about the overlapping challenges of the time, which we today now describe as polycrisis, right? Everyone hears about polycrisis now all the time, from COVID to financial instability to climate change, all of that overlapping. And that was their concern already in 1968. 1972, they published the first report to the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth, which was very, very widely anticipated and met fierce resistance as well. Some words on that in a bit. But maybe the general perspective, how do we operate, how do we work, is a holistic, global, and interdisciplinary approach. That means we look at the problems of the world, at the future problems of the world from this perspective, which includes our membership of, as Bernd mentioned, scientists, business leaders, academics, and trying to, by putting this group together of different people, trying to identify the problems in greater detail. You know, sometimes it's more important to ask the right questions than giving the right answers right away, and then discussing the solutions with policymakers, business leaders, and people in the space. On the right, you see 6 blind men touching an elephant and trying to identify what exactly they are touching. And everyone only looks at a certain part or touches a certain part, and obviously gets it wrong. If you just touch the ear of an elephant, you might think it's a carpet. If you just touch the skin, you might think it's a tree. But only by the combined knowledge of them, only by zooming out of this, only by looking at the different parts together, you can see the whole picture. And you can see that the whole translated to a system level, that the whole system is more than its individual parts, and that all these individual parts kind of are connected to each other and are not to be seen separately. So if you look at the financial system today, you can't just discuss the financial system. You have to see how it is embedded in the economy. Same with climate change and all these things. So that's the basic perspective we operate in. And based on this philosophy, work on different themes, including future values and moral, including finance, including economics, and including climate, of course. 1972, the limits to growth were published, and the main sentence of this book was, if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. The most probable result will be a rather sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. So the whole idea, what the team of the Limits to Growth did with the help of a system dynamic computer model at MIT in Boston, was to look at the interrelations of these factors of pollution, industrialization, population, food production, and see what happens if all of this just continues to grow as it was seen in the early stages of the 70s. And what they said was not, as it was often misinterpreted, that the oil would run out in 1990, or that there was a collapse right behind the door, or that the next 10 years decide about the survival of humanity. But it was said that, look, if you have these growth unlimited on a finite planet, at some point, the support system of Earth, means both the resources, but also the absorbing capacity in terms of CO2, will not be able to deal with this growth anymore. And that will lead to a sudden decline in these factors. I will say in a second something on the accuracy, but I want to point out one woman who was mostly responsible for writing this book, but didn't even make it on the cover of the first German version of Limits to Growth, because the publisher said that having women on the title doesn't really sell as many books, which is of course terrible, but that's why it's even more important to mention her. And Donella Meadows was really the person who managed to put together a narrative and a story out of this data and out of all the statistics. And I really like this quote, which is from the 30 years update you mentioned, Bernd, and shows a little bit that it's not only about a material dimension, but also about what is good life actually, what is well-being for people. And she said, people don't need enormous cars, they need admiration and respect. They don't need a constant stream of new clothes. They need to feel that others consider them to be attractive. And they need excitement and variety and beauty. People don't need electronic entertainment. They need something interesting to occupy their minds and emotions, and so forth. Trying to fill real but non-material needs for identity, community, self-esteem, challenge, love, joy, with material things is to set up an unchangeable appetite for false solutions to never satisfied longings. A society that allows itself to emit and articulate its non-material human needs and to find non-material ways to satisfy them would require much lower material and energy throughput and would provide much higher levels of human fulfillment. This is just to mention that Limits to Growth and the Club of Rome was not only about, oh, we look at how much resources are left in the ground, or what is the CO2 doing with our atmosphere. It was basically always about what is human well-being on a finite planet, and what does that look like. To show a little bit the message of the Limits to Growth, I will show you a 1-minute short clip that exemplifies a little bit what growth, and especially exponential growth on a finite planet is. Bernd, if you also hear the sound in a second, please raise your thumb, because I was not sure if that works here with. Great. But we don't see the video, is that right? It's just a picture, right?
That's right. It's just the picture.
Okay. Well, I'm already behind time anyway, so maybe can I share the presentation with you afterwards, Bernd, and you
Sure.
just share it with the
Or
group?
if it's on YouTube, or you can share the link also to the video, whatever.
Yeah, I do it afterwards. It's basically the story many of you know of the invention of chess and what exponential growth means in terms of putting one rice corn on the first field, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, 8 on the fourth, and in the end, that would be more rice than is available on the whole planet, to show that exponential growth is different than linear growth, right? Exponential growth is described very detailed in Limits to Growth, and therefore describes the problem as the sudden collapse at some point, because what we saw in the last 50 years was pretty much that the world followed what is called business as usual scenario of the Limits to Growth. It was the Limits to Growth put out 12 different scenarios with different assumptions. So it was not a prediction. It was to say, look, we take certain assumptions, such as this amount of resources are available in the world. This and this will be the rate of technological development. This or that will be the absorption of CO2 in the atmosphere, although CO2 was not a big factor back then, but anyways. And then kind of compared this. And in the business as usual scenario, so following the trend we had back then, the result was indeed the decline and collapse at some point mid this century. There have been various comparisons of the study with actual real data. The most recent one is by Gaia Brandenhorst. She was back then called Gaia Brandenhorst. Now she's called Harrington. But she wrote a paper on the development, comparing the model which was used back then with empirical data of today. And she came to the conclusion that the development very much aligns with the business as usual scenario of the Limits to Growth. You could now take the difference of which of the scenarios fitted best. I'm not sure if that's even the most important part. I think the most important part is that the trend was pretty much right, and that the main message is not even, it's not rocket science to know that unlimited material growth on a finite planet is not possible. There's this quote by Kenneth Boulding, who said, anyone who believes in indefinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. So there is definitely a kind of something which is easily understandable. However, in the last 50 years, what we saw was a very, very strong logic of acceleration in every imaginable area of our life and economic system. You see here on this graph different factors, such as water use, such as large dams, such as paper production, such as population, such as real GDP. And basically on the right side, then you see factors such as methane or carbon dioxide, and all of that. The main point here is that all of these physical factors and material factors have an exponential growth logic in them. It is not that that this has always been like that in world history. It's basically something that started in the middle of the last century, and since then has seen an enormous increase in every imaginable category. To show that a little bit more, where we have been, where we are now, this is just a graphic from a different angle. This is where okay, I don't know if that works here. You can see the line now, but you see also that in 1972, the problem was still manageable. You know, it was a completely different level. Why, when you speak with the authors from back then, they were like, they were, by the way, 26, 27, so quite young, and they said, yeah, of course. I mean, it's, you know, it is a big problem, but it is also handleable. We can kind of go a different course. It is possible to now tell the world that we have a big problem, but it is also possible to change that. And so with that motivation, this report was published. Only that in reality, the exponential growth logic just continued as foreseen. This has different consequences. Oh, sorry, there's still a slide in German, but it's about the picture on the left side, about the planetary boundaries. And you see here that a team around Johan Rockström, who was also an author of our new report, and Will Steffens, who unfortunately died a few weeks ago, identified 9 planetary boundaries. And these 9 planetary boundaries are kind of the safe operating space for humanity, as it's called. Within these circles, it is quite well known what happens to the climate system. It's quite well known how nature reacts, and we can have a stable planet to live on that. Beyond that, beyond a certain level, there is a tendency of destabilizing our global climate and our planet. This has different factors. We see the destabilization, obviously, most obviously in the climate discourse. You know, like temperature increases lead to more extreme weather events, more droughts, unpredictable weather in general. The really dangerous part, though, is this debate around tipping points, which many people have heard of now, that a certain increase or a certain change, for example, a certain increase of temperature, can have a big consequence and an irreversible consequence. For example, that a little bit more CO2 in the atmosphere and the corresponding increase in temperature can lead to an unstoppable melting of permafrost, or can potentially lead to making out of the rainforest, Amazon rainforest, as carbon saver, a carbon emitter, and a savanna. So this is the very crucial part, that there was a study last year that already with 1.5 degrees, these potential tipping points might become obvious. We just don't know behind a certain boundary what happens to Earth climate. It's just to say that our climate system is not a linear process, but it is a complex system with sometimes unforeseen consequences. The most obvious parts in this or most discussed parts of these planetary boundaries are climate change and biodiversity loss. Just briefly, that's also the slide I then showed the climate change deniers last week, and when people mention, oh, it's the volcanoes that caused the climate catastrophe. It is, you know, we humans have nothing to do with it. You see on the left side the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere in the last 800,000 years. So you see a relatively a constant moving dioxide, but not the massive increase we have seen since 1950. On the right side, you see the temperature increase in the atmosphere corresponding with that. Yeah, starting with the year 1850, you see the nearing the 1.5 degree, which is no doubt related to the CO2 emission and no doubt related to human activity in the world. So we are already seeing the warming of Earth. It's not that it's something abstract we see in a few years. This is already there. And I just want to mention that it was not just some kind of leftist green organization saying, oh, we have a problem. This is a study from fossil industry ExxonMobil, 1982, which was just kind of revealed a few years ago, and there was another paper recently. You see on the x-axis the year from 1960 to 2000, and on the y-axis the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. You see what they kind of suggested would happen with increasing CO2 to the temperature. And you see the red and blue line, what actually happened to the temperature. And it's clear, they knew, that was very concrete, that was very precise. It was very clear that CO2 has an impact on our climate. Fossil fuel industry knew, but the study was kept not revealed until recently. That's where we are. So just as I like these comics, and sometimes it's revealing, there's this saying of people, science shows that people showing science doesn't work. So it's sometimes nice to show a picture in between. And here you have a comic with Bart Simpson complaining that this is the hottest summer of his life. But Homer Simpson trying to keep him calm and say, this is the coldest summer for the rest of your life. So no worries. And on the right side, you see a little bit of an exaggerated picture of biodiversity loss. Which are the two components which are most crucial in this climate system. What is important to note, though, in all this debate, it is always the narrative of, yeah, we all sit in the same boat. We all contributed as world citizens, and we all have a problem to tackle this problem now together. If you look at the numbers, who is actually responsible for that? You see on the right side the material footprint. So the use of resources kind of in tons per person per year. And the interesting, it's scaled from low-income households to high-income households. The interesting part here is that obviously low-income households have a way lower material footprint, right? The more money you have bigger cars, you have bigger houses, you might eat more meat, you might travel more, you might go on a cruise ship. All of that, of course, contributes to your footprint. What is interesting, though, that you see the orange foot is the year 1990, and the pink one is the year 2017. That even the growth rate of the high income is higher than the low income. It's not that, oh, the low income people are catching up and all of a sudden they have the same material footprint than the rich ones, but that most of the increase in material consumption is due to the richest people in the world. And by the way, that's of course, if you look at the left scale, the richest 10% of income, that also includes, I would guess, most people here in the call, who are responsible for 50% of CO2 emissions worldwide, right? So the richest 1% in the world is responsible for as many CO2 emissions as the poorest half of the world, which is important to note, because it's not that the people who cause the problem also bear the consequences. It is rather that the consequences, as you see here, are often bared by people who are not the one who caused the problem. It's not the people in the low-income countries who caused the problem who have now to suffer droughts and increasing sea level, but it is people in the rich countries. This is just to show we have a big problem here. The problem is caused by certain people, and this is why we can separate the climate, ecological space, and the social space. These two are very, very much interlinked. You can't just say, oh yeah, okay, let's only fight the climate space, because if you look at the contributors to this climate change, then it is clear that it has something to do with income. It has something to do with our economic system, and it has an argument of global justice. So that just to mention why we did that. And then last point, because before I come to the recent publication, we see that for a very long time we had this narrative of, okay, at least we are extracting our economy, we are polluting our air, we are destroying the planet, but this growth that I showed at the beginning is at least leading to well-being for people and making people happy. We see that this is not necessarily longer the case on a global scale. We see that global well-being, and that aligns also with kind of happiness research and all of that, is rather declining, and social tensions in the world are increasing. So the economic system is not only causing environmental damage, it is also not being able anymore to satisfy the basic needs of people in terms of happiness. And I think that is also a dimension to keep in mind, that well-being, which should be one of the goals of our economies, is something different than GDP growth or something like that, right? It's not if politicians say we need to grow our economy, that's not necessarily aligned with making people happier. And that was the main question for another project called Earth4All. The question was, can we achieve something like well-being for all for 9 or 10 billion people on a relatively stable planet within planetary boundaries? This is the whole question we had when we started the project 2.5 years ago. And the project is based on 3 pillars. The left one is a complicated computer model, which is similar to the one in 1972, a system dynamic one. So looking at the interdependencies of social economic factors and acknowledging that all of that is part of each other. So the system, the computer system, can see what happens to the climate if population growth. What happens, what is the relationship between energy and inequality? What is the consequence for food system with increasing biodiversity loss and stuff like that? So this computer system is based on thousands of variables and tries to define certain policies that are able to bring us to this theme of well-being for all within planetary boundaries. But we also know that all models are wrong. Some are useful, and we know that every model is only as good as the assumptions you put into the model and the interpretation of the numbers you get out of the model. That's why we established a transformational economics commission, which involves 30 economists from all over the world. In Germany, people might know Maya Göbel or Ernst von Weizsäcker, European-wide, it's Kate Raworth or Tim Jackson. But we tried to expand that to development economists from India, Jayati Ghosh, who's brilliant, from people from Ecuador who worked on the concept of buen vivir and what is a good life there. And all of these people we put together in a group and said, look, let's write this book together. Which was sometimes challenging, but in the end it worked out and people agreed and we managed to finalize this book. And the third pillar was that we said, but also it's just a book, and we want also that this book gets talked about. We want the political implementation of this. We want conversations with business leaders, policymakers, other groups, and therefore established a global campaign coming along with it. The vision, as I mentioned, is an economic system that prioritizes health and well-being for people and planet. So instead of vague goals such as we want to grow our economy, GDP growth, whatever, the vision is quite clear that we want well-being for all on a relatively stable planet. What we then did in the project, as I mentioned before, Limits to Growth had 12 scenarios, different ones, different assumptions. We noticed that 12 scenarios is too much. It's not understandable, and we wanted to have a kind of easier narrative in the sense of presenting 2 different scenarios. One future, 2 scenarios. The one is too little too late. It's basically what happens if we continue with our current pathway, with our current politics, with our current climate change measures. The second one is the giant leap. What happens if we implement what we call extraordinary turnarounds to kind of change politics in various areas? And the result, and I will only remain on this slide for a second because it's on a small screen too complicated, but you see the different scenarios, the outcomes for different factors. Most importantly, in Too Little Too Late, we will see that climate temperature will increase over 2 degrees. We will see that this leads to destabilization of societies, not only because of droughts and food scarcity and problems in many areas, but also because this we see that with the current politics, also inequality will widen and will increase. And with increasing inequality, this is not only a normative question, it's also a question of the functionality of societies. And I think this is crucial, that we believe that in this too little too late scenario, with increasing inequality, social collapse might even occur before climate collapses, and the dysfunctionality of societies due to increased inequality will make it more difficult for them to act on the turnarounds we have. The giant leap scenario in comparison is a world where we stabilize the climate below 2 degrees, where inequality decreases, where social tension in societies decreases, and we see kind of a higher resilience of societies to deal with the challenges and problems in the world, and thereby also increasing well-being for people. And if you're interested, I can say a few more words later on how we measured well-being, but this is kind of the main goal. We want well-being for people and the planet. But what does it mean? If we have now these two scenarios, and we know that the giant too little too late, the current policies won't bring us where we want to go, we suggest these 5 different global turnarounds. These turnarounds, again, come from the knowledge that social and ecological factors belong together. We need to implement them, all of them together. And they are 5 different factors. The one is transform and accelerate human development in low-income countries. That is mostly referring to the poverty turnaround, as we call it. Yeah, it is crucial to get people out of poverty. We have made enormous progress in the last decades, but still half of world population lives from below $4. So it is an absolute imperative to bring these people out of poverty, not only from a normative perspective, but also to increase resilience in these countries and make sure that these countries also benefit from a global economic system where the financial flows too often benefit the ones who already have it. The second one is the inequality turnaround, transform wealth distribution by ensuring the wealthiest 10% have no more than 40% of national income. That is also related to the fact that we see that by increasing inequality, societies partly fall apart. We see in the US more obviously than in other countries so far what happens if certain groups are able to buy power and buy influence. We see that with the Koch brothers. We see that with donations to Republicans. We see that money is not only, oh, I can buy me a new yacht. It's also, I can buy me influence and power. And that just happens after a certain amount. And that is important to consider. The third one is the energy system turnaround. Most importantly for fighting climate change, half emissions every decade. The fourth one is the food turnaround, making the food system regenerative and nature positive, which means that at the moment, our food systems and agriculture is contributing about 25% to climate change and is also the biggest factor in biodiversity loss. So the food factor plays a crucial role. And the last one is transform gender power imbalances, empower women, and invest in education for all. That is also 2 factors. One, the normative component. The other one is that we know that empowering women also comes along with a stabilization of birth rates and population growth. That was a topic which was very often discussed in a very weird way, I would say, in the last decades. Very often, like Europeans speaking about Africans who have too many children, whatever, which is difficult to debate, especially for the reasons I mentioned before. The material footprint, the problem is really in the rich countries and not in the poor countries. But at the same time, we do, of course, want to stabilize the population at a certain degree. We think that population actually will be stabilized by the end of the century at about 9 billion. The current UN estimate thinks it's going to be 11 billion. That is yet to be seen. But all of these kind of asks are not just normative dimensions. We also have kind of concrete policy demands coming along with it. This is not a blueprint, and sorry that some slides are in German still, but this is not a blueprint in saying it's exactly what needs to happen. We know exactly the solution. This is not the case, and it will differ across different countries and regions and with different people. But this is kind of on the global level suggestions where we see that this leads to a result of the giant leap scenario. And I will briefly go through these turnarounds in the next slides, not mentioning all of the policies in detail. If we want to come to that in the discussion, happy to, but I also don't want to use too much time and look forward to speaking to you. But just to say that in the pyramids, you see on the bottom, you see kind of policy measures that are easy to implement in a way. We want kind of to make the food systems more efficient is something we can do within our current system and paradigm. To look at energy efficiency is something we're discussing at the moment anyways. It's about, damming houses and making sure that we try to reduce the energy consumption we have by making our economy more resilient. If you move up there, the proposals become a little bit more bold, I would say, or more difficult to implement. So in the equality turnaround, for example, you see easy to start with more progressive taxation and especially international agreements on minimum taxation to avoid kind of capital fleeing the countries. But at the top, you see something like universal basic dividend, which is an idea that is already implemented in Alaska, where companies that use our global commons, that means our kind of resources, land, could be expanded to data, whatever, pay part of that into a citizen fund, and that citizen fund then redistributes the money to all citizens in the country. That in Alaska means at the moment, I think the people get like $2,000 out of that per year. It's a normative dimension of saying we want that everyone can benefit from our global commons. So you see at the bottom, we have the my easy one going up, more difficult, but also necessary. The first one we have there is saying goodbye to poverty. The general idea there, or the general question, is if low-income countries can avoid the mistakes of our current high-income countries and only achieve progress through exploiting nature. And what has to happen that they can avoid that. And an important dimension for us is to see that it's not about us donating a little bit more money to certain countries and say like, and now deal with your corruption and then you will be rich as well. We need to tackle the systemic problems we have on a global level that actually at the moment prevent these states of developing towards rich societies through certain boundaries they have. One is that in this pyramid, we see expand policy space. Specifically through two measures, we see that at the moment, the poorest countries very often pay more to repay their debt, particularly to rich countries, than they can invest in transformations and climate change. So one demand includes a debt relief for poor countries. Another one is that we see that not everyone benefits equally from the globalization, right? We have seen that in Mexico, for example, with a NAFTA free trade treaty, where small farmers in Mexico all of a sudden had to compete with Nestle and Monsanto, which is of course difficult. And if you look at the history, all of these countries that you now name as great examples of getting out of poverty and industrializing, like South Korea, Japan, they started with a highly protected interior industry, infant industry protection. And in the book, we have the comparison that you would not let a how do you call that? The high weight boxer fight against a lightweight boxer. You have different categories you need to consider here. So all of that is kind of the idea of this poverty turnaround, is enabling countries through a change of financial systems and the global order to develop in a sustainable way. The second one, inequality. That's a quote from the book. Countries where citizens are more equal economically function better. They have greater social cohesion, an essential ingredient for making long-term collective decisions that benefit the many, not the few. So we have already seen that the richest people contribute more to climate change than the poorest one. We also see that inequality in the world at the moment is increasing, not decreasing. And we see that this has problems for the functionality of our societies. Here you see that the wage inequality in the US has increased considerably. That's you see on the left. And at the same time, surveys show that the trust in government has decreased as well, because people have the feeling they don't benefit from the economic system anymore. They, the work for something, but their real income is still decreasing. So that makes them make less trust in the governments. And in the end, people like Trump can come out of that. This is very much correlated. We see that the social trust is especially high in countries with low inequality. Scandinavian countries are always considered, all of that. So there's also a recipe to try, and I know it's not monocausal, right? There are, of course, other factors, but in general, inequality plays a role in that. So this is just to say that by limiting inequality and by making sure that states function better, this enables the states also to implement the transformations in the energy and in the food sector we need to see to avoid this collapse and to come to the giant leap scenario. Because we see here that through increased inequality, governments are not able to act adequately to these challenges, which will just increase the problem even more, which then becomes a vicious circle. So inequality, very different dimensions, but a crucial factor, not only for social reasons, but also environmental ones. The third one is the empowerment turnaround. Achieving gender equity is a crucial point, as I mentioned, as it is a normative dimension, but also related to global population growth. I won't go much deeper into that. We can do that later. But the great thing is that we know that factors such as a good social systems, especially education for women and girls, enabling leadership positions for women and girls is something we want anyways. It is something that is, as a society based on human rights and equal human rights, something we want to achieve. But at the same time, these factors, education, social security, healthcare system, leadership, also leads to decreased birth rates and stabilization of population. The fourth turnaround is the food turnaround, which is, of course, a tricky one because we know that everyone needs food to survive. We know that since 1970, the people who died of hunger has decreased considerably, which is great, although the population increased. But at the same time, this, of course, comes with a price, right? The way we produce our food, the way we do agriculture at the moment contributes massively to climate change and biodiversity loss. So we still have an effect that 10% of population lives with food insecurity, while at the same time, and I checked this number various times because I find it crazy, 2 billion people are overweight or suffer overweight or adipositas. I don't know what that's in English, but the problem is not only that there's not enough food for many people still in the world, and COVID threw us back 6 to 7 years. It's also a very unhealthy diet we have in countries of the West, especially. So there are different factors. One important factor is that we have to decrease food waste. At the moment, 1/3 of the produced food is being thrown away. So this alone would help massively. We need to stop expanding the areas where we produce. Like there was this debate in Brazil with Lula and Bolsonaro, where the debate was always we have to stop going to the rainforest, which is of course true, but we also need to acknowledge that the Brazilians don't cut the rainforest for themselves, right? It's something that production of soya also comes to the cows on the global world market we then eat. So there are different factors reducing food security. There are new techniques. In the end, it's also about our diets. We know that 80% of global agricultural land is being used for production for animal diets, for foods coming from animals, while this only contributes about 20% to global calories consumption. So there is a factor of massive food meat production and the problem. So just to show what we have done and what you can see in the books, you will always see a comparison of what the model shows us, of what happens if we implement these turnarounds or if we don't. Yeah, you see that here for global footprint per person. We see that in the too little too late scenario, in the most areas, it will either increase or stagnate, and in the giant leap scenario, the footprint per person will decrease. And I didn't show that for the poverty one, for the inequality one at the beginning. That there we have a similar statistic that you see in the giant leap scenario, we would be able to decrease inequality, and in the other one, it would increase. The last one, an important one, but I won't talk too much about it because we have this in many countries as a main discussion at the moment, is the energy transformation. Energy is, of course, crucial to deal with the climate challenge. Yeah? And we know that there are measures such as energy efficiency, which means reducing energy in areas is necessary. We can't just say we replace all, the standard example, all combustion car engines by electric engines. You know, that is necessary, especially in rural areas and in smaller cities. In countries or in cities like Berlin, where I'm at the moment, it's just not sustainable to replace cars one by one and say everyone who had a combustion engine before has an e-car now, because we need to reduce the amount of energy we use. And that is not only electrifying everything, which is true, we need to do that, you know, especially industry, but it is also about reducing the amount of energy we use. So the energy turnaround, a crucial way, and we I think in Germany we see the challenge of the debate on that at the moment, and that it is not easy, of course. And I would say that also the energy turnaround again exemplifies why we need to think social factors and ecological ones together. For example, why do people complain if windmills or solar parks are being built next to their houses? Because very often they don't benefit from it in a way, right? I mean, there are now initiatives, neighborhood initiatives, where people can benefit from the profits that are being done. But if people just have the feeling, oh, now it's loud here and annoying, and I have shadow on my house, which I didn't have before, and I don't even benefit from that, it is understandable why they are against it. So I think an inclusiveness in this energy transformation is also required. I know that this is a lot and there are different turnarounds, and we can discuss all of this more in detail. But of course, this is all what is what we have done in Earth4All. So the book is out in different languages. It is easily digestible. We have kind of what I described with the scenarios is tried to explain in non-technical terms. So what we do, we accompany 4 girls who are born in 2020 and see how their lives develop differently in the different scenarios at different places in the world. We now have, in 1 month, you see the Chinese coming out, and a few others in the next month. And that is kind of the result of where we want to be, is that with the implementing the measures in Giant Leap, we see that well-being is increasing and social tension is decreasing, and that is in the end what we think will be make a better world for people possible. So yeah, that is the last point on this is that we see this just as a start of a global conversation. What I mentioned as a third pillar of the campaign is that we want to engage with people, we want to discuss, we want people to use Instagram and show us what their perfect world would look like, or go to events, speak to governments, speak to industry leaders, and create a movement out of this initiative. And I will stop here for now. If there are any questions to specific slides, let me know. And otherwise, very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Till, and big applause. I think, you know, bringing us here through these topics, these very complex topics, in just 45 minutes. So you're on point, I would say. Yeah, let's maybe, before we maybe discuss or take it to the OD world, the topics we heard. Any questions to Till regarding Club of Rome, Limited Growth, Earth4All? So anything you want to dive into more in depth, or any questions of understanding?
Everything clear.
Is there one government saying, okay, I follow these principles?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a few governments now that define themselves as well-being economic alliance governments. And these governments, it's at the moment, it's Finland, New Zealand, Wales. So to admit, not the biggest countries in the world at the moment, but they are implementing these kind of going beyond growth at all cost paradigm. We are in contact with them. It's not that they are at the moment exactly thriving towards these 5 turnarounds, but it is the general idea for us to go beyond growth at all cost and look at the social and environmental factors is recognized by some. And now to this alliance, Canada is thinking about joining, which would of course be great. And there are governments interested in that. And we will now, as the next phase, also start with country level engagement. So that means that we will develop a little bit what does too little too late and what does giant leap mean for Austria or Germany or Wales. Or I had a call with someone from Ukraine today, which would of course be interesting. But that is a little bit the idea to implement it. So I would say there is a movement. I would say there are countries thinking about this and an open ear and interest. But of course, it's also a challenging change and transformation.
Thanks. Other questions?
The next question goes pretty much in the same direction, because do you feel that other organizations are kind of competing, like, because we have at the moment this discussion in Germany about these Fridays for Future activists and things like that, and there seems to be so many initiatives. Is this even a problem that we have too many and they're competing with each other about who has the best concept?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's no competition in this space. I think it's really everyone who contributes to that is perfect, and I really see all of this aligned, like all of this. But many initiatives now. Speaking about similar aspects is great. I would say though, and not in the way of we are better than others. That's not the case. But it is very important to combine the economic system with the climate change measures. So I think that that what Earth4All tries to do on a global level, combining this, there are a few initiatives like We All, Wellbeing Economic Alliance, who are trying to do the same. But I would always say fantastic if this space gets crowded, more and more initiatives doing that, and there is no competition whatsoever. You know, if governments say, oh, we implement something along these 5 turnarounds, but that's completely unrelated to Earth4All, fantastic. Like, it's not about, you know, promoting our identity here, but rather leading to that. And if that movement then creates this movement of movements and more people come on board, I think it's great.
Cool. Tobias.
Yeah. Thanks for the great talk, Till. My question was about, because I also read the book, and also when we met last year, it's so visionary and it's so radical, these 5 initiatives in the end. And in the first point, my thought was, that's never going to happen. Knowing the world how it is right now and the mechanics, how should this work out? And I can imagine I'm not the only one who is thinking that way. And so how it's kind of also inspiring, but it's really a tough balance between those. And so the question would be, how do you handle this? Because you're obviously aware that is really a radical position that you're taking here, and it's needed, obviously. So
yeah. Good point. And I think there's, you know, people deal with these things differently. Some people get frustrated, also from Limits to Growth, original authors, think like nothing is going to happen ever. What I liked, there is a Carlota Perez, an author, said about Earth4All, for the first time, we have a narrative about our future that is neither utopia nor collapse, and that is endorsable across the political spectrum. It is an aspirational future. It is livable for all, and most crucially, it is achievable. So we tried really to become so concrete in order to connect it to actual policy making. And I think that it's true. If we only think about the big picture, it can be frustrating. And if we think about this, the whole thing needs to be implemented now. It's an enormous challenge, and it's a huge transformation. But if you narrow it down a little bit to the political actions we see, oh, there is a debate about special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund going on how to give more funds to poor countries. There is this energy transformation going on, and people notice that, after the Ukrainian war, energy independency might not only be good for the climate, but also for security. All these things, I think that is a little bit what many of us look at, these things that are taking place, and not losing sight of the big transformation. But I think if you only look at the big vision and the long-term goal in 50 years, then it can be more frustrating than becoming concrete and saying, now let's implement at least this and this and that, and then see where it leads us to.
Thanks.
And maybe adding to that question, Till, was there also, I mean, if you think giant leap through, or if you execute it through, was there also, and we saw this computer model, was there some kind of too much, too beyond scenario? So from systemic coaching, right? There's also in the good stuff, there's also something, or always something bad. Is at least the belief, right? So what if we go giant leap? Would something not so good happen? I cannot make up something now, but I don't know, too much clean water maybe, and then some bacteria cannot grow anymore. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Was this somehow simulated?
Interesting question. I think it's of course always we always emphasize also the limitations of the model, of course, right? We can't predict the future, and these things you mentioned, even if they could potentially happen, they might not be seen in the model because the model only deals with assumptions we already know of. But what is of course true are discussions we had about this electrification of everything point I mentioned, because there you have the debate going on of what, how much can you increase energy consumption actually, and when do you have other problems such as resource and rare earth discussion. So can you kind of overshoot the electrification of everything, which would then diminish the resources in the world? So that debate was there. That's also why we included this energy efficiency, and we need to reduce consumption in certain areas. But in the end, that might be the area where this goal has unintended consequences. In general, I think unintended consequences are very, very difficult to model, and one would have to see how it develops. But good point.
Yeah. Cool. So if no more question of understanding, so to say, maybe we can take it a little bit to the OD space. And I would love to try something out. When I listened to Till's presentation, I saw a couple of things that I was then somehow relating to my work of OD, or of organizational development, and I'm quite holistically understanding organizational development from, innovation and future processes and methods over org design, change management, leadership development, team development, the individual, so to speak. And to me, for example, just stood out three things. I would have loved sometimes to have these kind of models and data simulations on internal topics like health, or certainly also bottom line results, and how are they connected, and so on. So this for me stood out. The other 2 points, for example, were never thought about that, maybe bringing more women in leadership positions, just saying, hey, diversity is one of our organizational development goals in terms of we get more ideas and better innovations and so on, would also then decrease, but also decrease the birth rate. Also to have this idea, that was my third point, which I found interesting to transfer to OD, to say what you said about the poor countries. How can they learn to still create more wealth, but without exploiting the planet? So for me, it was like, what can new companies, maybe, how can they do OD differently by not doing all the faults that we as ODler maybe did in existing companies. So maybe if you have any transferring insights, aha effects, or just ideas or questions we should discuss in the next 20 minutes, please let us take 1 minute to think for ourselves. And if you have an insight or a question or something that triggered your mind, please put it first in the chat, and then we can maybe go topic by topic through these chat texts. And it's an experiment. I'm just trying this out here. anything you heard what you can relate to OD or your work of organizational development, people development, change management, and so on? Until the biggest task as a facilitator is to keep the silence. I don't know how you could transfer this to Earth4All to maybe trust that dialogues will happen. I don't know.
I mean, for me, it's very interesting to hear from others, especially as we one aspect we have in these turnarounds is that we think about the scalability, right? And say like, look, this could also maybe be implemented in little towns with different measures. But like looking at the energy, food, blah blah. Maybe it could also be implemented in certain companies, right? Looking at empowerment, meaning that women don't get less money than men, or looking at inequality, that certain people don't have 40 times as much money as others, but looking at renewable energy or good food in the canteen or whatever. I think that that's an interesting discussion where I would also like to hear from you, or you think like, oh no, that's stupid, doesn't relate to us at all, which could also be a valuable feedback.
Yeah, let's maybe go through it, because I see the first things coming up in the chat, and then happy that you ask a question to the audience. That would be great if you could ask that question later again, Till. Okay, so please keep it coming, keep typing. We will just already start with Tobias, looking at the only 20 minutes left. Tobias, can you say some words? What was your thinking? How did you connect this to OD, and how could we work with positive emotional charge visions?
Sure. Yeah, it relates to my question before. So having all these radical changes, you rather get frustrated. And the motivation, we have a burning platform. Yeah, the burning platform is our planet, and we see climate change and all the stuff going on. And what we in the end know from science is that these burning platforms don't work for change, but what you need is a positively charged vision for the future. Like you said, this quote from this Latin American woman. It's the first time that we have an actionable plan. Forget about the details, but this is a way where we can go for. Yeah, this is much more, for me, much more positive and identify more. You can identify more than with, we have this and this and everybody asks himself, how should it work out? Sure, you go deeper, but that's the idea. So yeah.
So exactly like change management don't work maybe so much on the burning platform, but create a inspiring vision for the future. Yeah, love that. Lucia, sustainable HR. What else besides pensions, employees live, maybe is there for sustainable HR? Do you want to explain a little bit?
Yeah, I see a strong connection then that there's already good things going on in the companies. So when I look at Edenred, so with the CSR program, so there's consequent engagement for people, planet, and progress. So regarding reduction of food waste or engagement for healthy nutrition, and so currently this fair pay and also not women only in leadership, but fairly paid in part-time positions, or to bring them back as early as possible into the workforce. So I see little things, so they're delivering into these targets. And so the green HR discussion, really, when it comes to see what do we pay people today, and could they afford their living when they are retired based on what they earned working for us. I didn't think about this too much a year ago, I have to admit, but yeah.
And it sounds a little bit already like a answer to the question Till asked while you guys were typing, that all these initiatives driven by companies maybe can be framed now under how did you say it, Till, like a storyline, or it makes more sense. Why are we doing this as a company? Because I had the same impression that some CSR programs and initiatives which I saw 5-10 years ago, I mean, it was like, why are we doing this? Okay, because it's CHR, but whatever that means. And now for me, it becomes more tangible, I would say, or I see the big picture now.
Yeah, it's somehow a trend, and some organizations do it to get this sticker or certificate, but we do it since the 60s, so from the very first beginning also of the company. And maybe it's different if you compare countries. So if you see more stronger trends in the enterprises, but there is a lot, and I think it was also pushed by these 17 goals. So there is if there is constant fire and these researchers, so you give an outlook till 2080, which is amazing. So that really helps to see, okay, what
works.
Yeah, so keep people motivated to progress and not to stop doing because they think, what could I do, or is there a long-lasting effect?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking, or even give employees more of this big picture, maybe, connect this more to maybe these initiatives that are out there. Thank you, Lucia. Katrin, you wrote the footprints that have shown that the footprints of poor people are much smaller. Let me rethink the focus OD often takes. Can you explain that a little bit? What should be the new focus?
So for me, it was very impressive, the visualization of these footprints. So the comparison that actually the rich people, so these 10%, have the biggest impact. And I think this combination also to see, okay, what is with the poor people, and that is much less than we impact on this whole thing. So, and then I'm thinking about all these OD initiatives and things where we set up big programs to support the third world population and so on. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, but maybe the focus here is too narrowed, on only one chain. I think we need to refocus also on ourselves, because we are the people that sit in this 10% population, and we actually need to support ourselves to change something. And this is something where I often see, so if I look very critical on the things that happen, that this is maybe not happening that much. And maybe it's also, it's easier to focus, and I think it's also it's right to focus on the big picture and to make transparent, and of course it's also right to support the poorest of the poorest and so on. But this does not mean that we also have a responsibility to change something.
And what you were saying, and relating this to what Till was saying in terms of scalability, maybe we have to rethink that. I mean, often the most money or budgets goes into whatever leadership programs and so on, out of the reason of, we want to scale probably something in the organization. But maybe this way of scaling even within the organization is the wrong. So the normal employee, the poor people, so to speak, don't get, or it doesn't really reach those people. So maybe we can also rethink whether we are doing the right measures sometimes in organization development or people development and so on. And still, how do we scale, right? The stuff, because there is not enough budget probably for everybody to go through certain measures. Cool. Petra, anything to add on what you wrote? DEI work, sustainability, equal pay, or any precise ideas or correlations you had, or what could be different?
No, just in general, where I thought, okay, this is where currently in the HR world, you probably have the most touch points with the topic.
Yeah. And And that would be maybe my next question before we then come to the question again from Till. What would you guys say? I mean, also the measures I see, or what Lucia, what you told her, it seems to me a lot of structural measures. So, you know, we have a CSR program and so on. Somebody decides to go for equal pay and so on. But maybe, you know, working in the system with people and so on as OD guys, anything we could think of, or you know, how are we working there enough to also take the context of society and planet into consideration, or any good practices, or more good practices, even if it's working on the system, as I call it, so structural decisions and so on. How do you guys integrate societal topics, planetary topics in your daily organizational development work, or HR work, or leadership development, and so on and so on? And maybe we haven't heard yet from Thomas and Sebastian. Maybe you guys want to chime in. But also the others. Tobias.
Well,
or are these new boundaries, right? I mean, let's discuss.
Well, it's my thinking in the last, I don't know, weeks or so is that it has to do a lot with a personal mind shift, or shift in a personal mindset. And I don't know if you heard about those inner development goals that have been coming up, where one of the big things is the question of feeling connected. And this goes way back. We are in psychology, in being children, learning to live in this world. So and we are taught to live this feeling of separation. So there's the world, and we act upon the world. This is one hand side, and here we are, and so it's transactional. But we lost by kind of the notion that we are part of this world, and that any action has so it's a system in which we are acting. And I think if you get this feeling that this apple is coming from South Africa, or you eat, these are old examples, you eat strawberries in winter which are coming from New Zealand or wherever, and you see what kind of effect this has, then you start at least thinking. And I think the most important thing is to get out of this linear thinking that we know right now, into a new bubble of circular thinking where we can really make the world more sustainable. Point.
Maybe Till, quick answer towards inner development goals and circular economy. Are you guys in the Earth4All somehow also relating to this, or touching on this, or?
Yeah, and maybe even before, I think some of the points that were mentioned, it's very, very interesting to listen, because it was mentioned purpose, it was mentioned the change of ourselves, it was mentioned the mindset shift, and all of that, of course, comes along with the transformation we need. I mean, one could even say there are not only planetary limits to growth, but maybe also kind of human limits to growth and to acceleration. There's this great German sociologist, Hartmut Rosa, who describes the modernity as a process of ongoing acceleration. We always have feeling, and every kind of technical advancement was supposed to support us, save us time, but people feel more stressed than ever. You know, we don't write like 10 letters anymore a day, but receive 100 emails, and everyone has a feeling of, oh, I don't have time for anything. And that is also like the constant, everything is getting faster, everything is getting more, is also a problem for the individuals themselves. So I would say that this kind of the structural level and the individual level are very closely aligned. There is even by the founder of the Club of Rome, there is a book or by the Club of Rome that came after Limits to Growth, which was called The Human Revolution, which is a little bit more about this human mindset and all these things. Or another one called No Limits to Learning, which is about the learning capacities of societies and people. And I think that all of that is very, very relevant and important. In Earth4All, we focused a little bit more on the structural dimension there. But we have a series of deep dive papers, it's called, on our website, where we dig a little bit deeper into certain aspects. I send you one, which is by Otto Scharmer. So I just post the link to all the deep dive papers in the chat.
I think he's quite new in OD space with his theory U.
Yeah, exactly. And he then referred that a little bit to Earth4All. And we worked a little bit with him. So this is his publication here.
Cool.
Feel free to have a look. So that is definitely there. Circular economy, yes, that's also concepts we work with. But I think there is still more to be explored about this relationship of mindset shift and purpose and change of ourselves in this structural dimension. It's a good point.
And I think, sorry to, just to mention, but there is also out of your initiative, there's the well-being for all. I don't know how the name was called, focusing on the well-being that you've been referring before in your talk. Huh?
Yeah. Well-being Economic Alliance. So we were very closely working with them, and they're good people. So you can check that out.
Cool. Well. Let's hear one more idea or good practice, or how do you bring maybe these systemic topics in your OD work, or how do you talk about this maybe with your internal customers, or something along these lines? Any other thoughts or good practices or?
Yeah, so with the leadership programs we develop and implement, we try to create these, how to say, social and emotional touch points, because I think people needs to be affected. So in a positive or negative way, or however, but there needs to be some activation. And it can be a visit in really a social institute or something that, I mean, we are in a bubble in our organizations. Normally, also in our family life and so on, we do not see these social, how to say, Brennpunkte, and to create some connections, to at least connect these areas. And so my experience is that people are really very affected, that they are really touched by these experiences.
And they transfer then also a little bit to daily leadership behavior, or?
So this is another story.
It doesn't need to be, but
I think awareness is always the first step. And then of course there is more to come also in the programs to transfer it. But at least to create this awareness, that people rethink their own behaviors, and that there's maybe more than we see through our eyes.
Great. Thanks, guys. First, now back to Till. What was your question just 10 minutes ago, or any other questions? I mean, now you're in the HR OD bubble. What would you ask them?
No, I think it was very interesting to me as well, and I think that the question we have or ask ourselves as well is in how far this is scalable and applicable to people working in other areas than global policymaking, because it's of course always a challenge that these demands are directed towards governments or global policymaking. And but I do think that even if it's not in the very practical implementation, we can take each turnaround one by one and implement it. It's a little bit about this thing of purpose. Where do we want to thrive towards to? What are goals we could have, and how can we combine the environmental and social goals also in our work? It can be abstracter than 5 turnarounds, that's not important, but it's about that vision. And I think that was interesting for me to hear as well.
Yeah, and maybe exactly to that point, question back to you in terms of because often internally with your CEO or your customer, you have to deal with this. Can you please follow me on a long vision first before we slice the elephant into pieces? So how do you with politics and so on or policymaker, how do you communicate this or how do you convince them to have also this long-term thinking while they surely have probably daily or monthly problems back in their governments and in their countries and so on? So how do you have these discussions there?
Yeah, I think there's, of course, a disalignment of the solutions we need, which are long-term, and the system in terms of election cycles, shareholder, blah, blah, which is all short-term. So it is, of course, difficult. I would say that the openness is there more than a few years ago. And I think people like Fridays for Future played a big role in that. But I would also say that there are, of course, certain systemic difficulties for policymakers to implement stuff, right? It's not that they're bad people and don't want to do anything right. I think there are, although these exist, of course, but there are, of course, many people who want to do the right thing, but then there are so many pressures and path dependencies and systemic challenges that they're not able to do so. So I think there is this quote by Roosevelt, I think, but I'm not sure who said to I think union leaders back then, oh, you convinced me, now make sure that I'm able to implement it, by meaning that now convince the public and make sure that there's a movement of people coming together and being able that I can act on what I'm convinced by anyways now, but I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. I like that metaphor for the dual approach of bottom up and top down, trying to bring this together and enable policymakers as well to implement these actions.
Great. Thank you, and great quote, and interesting that this, if you come to that point that you get somebody who's in formal power of the organization, maybe not to delegate it too much, right?
Yeah.
Because this is what we sometimes see in change management, like this stimulate but then abandon syndrome. Like, yeah, good idea, good change, good cultural ideas, whatever, and yeah, go for it. I have to do other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have to do other things. We have to save the planet through the means of OD and HR. So thank you everybody for joining also the discussion here at the end. Sadly, the time is up, but I think if you want to reach out to Till, or if there are any needs for more of these deep discussions, let us know. And Till, thank you again for coming, and it was really wonderful talking to you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
You. Good
Thanks
speaking to you.
a lot.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.